Imagine a moment when you realize you can no longer pretend. The masks you've worn for decades suddenly feel suffocating, physically constricting. The games everyone around you is playing become transparently obvious. The life you've meticulously built starts to feel less like a success story and more like a prison. A gilded cage made entirely of other people's expectations. You aren't clinically depressed. You are waking up. And with that profound, often unsettling awakening comes a slow, inevitable shedding of everything that isn't truly, authentically you. Carl Jung spent his entire life documenting this very process. He observed thousands of people transform spiritually, and he noticed something fundamental. Genuine, lasting spiritual growth doesn't happen through dramatic declarations or sudden revolutionary changes. It happens through a gradual releasing, a slow, quiet quitting of patterns that once felt like necessary survival mechanisms, but now feel like painful suffocation. Today, we are exploring the 7 core things Jung observed that highly spiritual people slowly, almost involuntarily, quit as they truly awaken. These aren't conscious, decisive choices at first. They are more like increasingly intense allergic reactions to an authenticity that grows stronger the clearer your spirit becomes. You don't wake up one morning deciding to quit these things. You simply wake up one day realizing you already have. If you've been feeling like you can no longer engage with life the way you used to, like you're becoming incompatible with normal existence, this is why. Your spirit is slowly and powerfully rejecting everything that isn't aligned with your deep, essential truth. And according to Jung, this rejection is not only inevitable, it is essential for your transformation. The first thing highly spiritual people slowly quit is the desperate hunger for approval. This isn't a willful decision. It happens because something shifts so profoundly in their fundamental psychological structure that approval-seeking becomes physically and emotionally uncomfortable. Imagine you've spent your entire life consuming sugar, and suddenly, violently, your body develops a total intolerance. That is precisely what happens spiritually. The approval you once craved for sustenance starts making you profoundly sick. Jung observed this phenomenon in patient after patient. As they developed spiritually, they would report strange, intense discomfort in situations where they used to seek validation. A woman who had always lived for her mother's smallest sign of approval suddenly felt nauseous when trying to please her. A man who needed constant professional recognition found himself unable to genuinely care about promotions or status symbols. This wasn't rebellion, it was evolution. Here is what is actually happening beneath the surface. As you develop spiritually, you begin to access what Jung called the self, your true, complete, and authentic core that exists well beyond the demands of the ego. This self doesn't need external approval because it is already intrinsically whole and complete. It is like a deeply rooted tree that has found groundwater. It no longer depends on the superficial rain. But the quitting process itself is slow, messy, and often deeply painful. You'll find yourself in a meeting about to say exactly what everyone wants to hear, and suddenly you simply cannot. The words get physically stuck. Your body rebels with a tremor or a sudden rush of heat. It isn't just anxiety. It is your authentic self refusing to participate in the performance, hitting an emergency brake in your soul. One of Jung's patients described it perfectly. I used to rearrange my entire personality depending on who I was with. Now when I try, it's like my soul hits an emergency brake. I physically cannot contort myself for approval anymore. This creates a strange liminal period where you've quit seeking approval internally, but haven't fully adjusted externally. You stop posting for the hit of likes, but still catch yourself checking your phone. You stop fishing for compliments, but still notice their absence. You are, in essence, between worlds, no longer addicted to approval, but not yet comfortable living entirely without that old security blanket. Jung observed that this transition typically takes years. First, you quit seeking approval from total strangers, then from mere acquaintances, then from close friends, and finally, and most difficultly, from family. Each layer of release brings both immense freedom and deep, unsettling grief. You're not just quitting a behavior, you are quitting an identity, the persona built on being agreeable, safe, and loved. The woman who lived for her mother's approval went through months of what felt like genuine withdrawal. She would automatically reach for her phone to call her mother for validation, then suddenly remember she couldn't do that anymore. Not because her mother was unavailable, but because her soul would not allow her to make that call. Her hands would literally shake when she tried to dial. But here is the beautiful consequence Jung documented. As the desperate hunger for approval dies, something else is born, an unshakable sense of inner worth. This is not mere confidence, which still secretly references others' opinions. This is worth, which references only itself. You stop needing others to validate your existence because you finally organically feel your existence from within. This is why highly spiritual people often seem mysteriously confident and calm. They aren't trying to be. They've simply quit the exhausting, lifelong game of earning their right to exist through others' approval. They've found what Jung called inner authority, a compass that points true regardless of any external opinion or applause. The second thing spiritual people slowly quit often shocks people: the need to be special. This is counterintuitive because aren't spiritual people supposed to know they are unique and divinely made? Yes, but there is a profound, essential difference between simply knowing your uniqueness and the compulsive need to be special. Jung discovered that as people develop spiritually, they go through what seems like a paradox. They become more unique, authentically, while simultaneously caring less about being perceived as special. They become more truly themselves while needing less recognition for it. They become truly extraordinary by decisively quitting the need to be seen as extraordinary. Here is how this happens. Early in spiritual development, people often experience what Jung termed spiritual inflation. They have a genuine, powerful awakening experience and suddenly feel chosen, superior, even slightly infallible. They've seen a truth others haven't. They've touched dimensions others can't reach. They know things others don't know. And for a while, this feeling of specialness feels like the ultimate spiritual achievement. You might find yourself subtly, or not so subtly, letting others know about your disciplined meditation practice, your profound synchronicities, or your esoteric insights. You aren't exactly bragging, but you are definitely differentiating yourself from the unconscious masses. But then inevitably, something shifts. Jung observed this critical shift in every genuinely maturing spiritual person he studied. The intense need to be special starts to feel heavy, exhausting, and fundamentally false. Like wearing a costume that once felt like wings but now feels like heavy chains. A man Jung treated had built his entire self-identity around being the most spiritually advanced. He was the one friends came to for wisdom, the one who always had the deepest insight, the one who meditated longer, fasted harder, and knew more about consciousness than anyone else. Then one day, in the middle of explaining some profound concept, he just stopped. Mid-sentence, he later told Jung, "I suddenly saw myself from outside, and I looked utterly ridiculous. I was using spirituality to be special, which is the complete opposite of what spirituality is." This radical recognition begins the slow quit. You start catching yourself about to share your spiritual experiences purely for the hit of specialness. You catch yourself about to drop hints about your consciousness level. You catch yourself about to position yourself as more awakened than others. And each time you catch yourself, it becomes exponentially harder to continue the performance. The quit manifests in subtle, powerful ways. You stop mentioning your spiritual practices unless directly and specifically asked. You completely lose interest in comparing consciousness levels. You quit needing others to know about your insights. You become deeply comfortable being seen as utterly ordinary or even invisible. You stop using spiritual language to elevate yourself above others. One woman described her transition perfectly. I used to need everyone to know I was different, deeper, more conscious. Now I'm happy to be invisible. Being special was a prison. Being nobody is freedom. But here's what Jung found most fascinating. As people quit needing to be special, they become truly unique. Not performatively unique, but authentically unique. When you stop trying desperately to stand out, your genuine, unadorned nature naturally distinguishes itself. When you quit performing your specialness, your actual innate special qualities emerge without effort. Jung called this individuation without inflation. You become completely yourself without needing anyone to notice it or approve of it. You become like a flower that blooms whether anyone is watching or not. The blooming is for the blooming, not for the watching. This entire shift terrifies the ego, which has often built its entire fragile structure on being special. If I'm not special, the ego desperately asks, then what am I? The answer, which takes years to fully accept, you're you. That's enough. That's everything. The third thing highly spiritual people quit is perhaps the most surprising, the performance of happiness. They don't quit happiness itself, but the compulsory, often forced performance of it. The constant need to appear positive, enlightened, and entirely beyond suffering. Jung observed that genuine spiritual development does not make people perpetually happy, it makes them perpetually real. And reality includes the full, uncompromising spectrum of human experience: joy and sorrow, peace and turmoil, light and shadow. In our modern culture, there's enormous suffocating pressure to be happy, especially if you identify as spiritual. You are culturally expected to be above negative emotions, beyond petty concerns, radiating pure love and light at all times. But Jung discovered this performance of happiness is actually deeply anti-spiritual. It is simply another mask, but this time, one with a spiritual face. As people develop genuine spiritual depth, they slowly quit this exhausting performance. They stop pretending everything is fundamentally fine when it clearly isn't. They stop forcing smiles when they are legitimately grieving. They stop robotically spouting positive affirmations when they are truly, genuinely struggling. They quit the spiritual bypass and bravely embrace the difficult path of spiritual embodiment. A therapist Jung supervised went through this transition dramatically. She'd built her entire practice on being the perfectly enlightened healer, always centered, always peaceful, always radiating impeccable wisdom. Then her son died, and she simply could not perform anymore. She tried to return to work with her old spiritual persona intact, but her body flatly wouldn't let her. She'd sit with clients trying to be the wise, calm healer, and tears would simply start falling without permission. She told Jung, "I thought being spiritual meant transcending human pain. Now I realize it means embracing it. I can't be the enlightened one anymore. I can only be the real one." If you're recognizing yourself in these patterns, if you're feeling that slow, necessary release of things you used to grip tightly, know that you are not alone. This journey of slowly quitting what no longer serves the true self is happening to millions of awakening souls right now. Before we explore the remaining 4 things spiritual people quit, take a moment to subscribe to this channel and join our community of souls who are courageously shedding the false to embrace the true. And please share in the comments what you found yourself slowly quitting. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Let's continue this journey together, because the next patterns might be the very ones you're experiencing right now. The 4th thing highly spiritual people slowly quit might be the most destabilizing: the need for certainty. This is the desperate grip on knowing, understanding, and having all the answers. Jung discovered that genuine spiritual growth leads not to acquiring more answers, but to being deeply comfortable with profound questions. It leads not to more certainty, but to a deep, abiding peace with the mystery of existence. It leads not to knowing, but to simple, expansive wonder. This shift absolutely terrifies the mind, which has spent a lifetime collecting certainties like protective armor. I know who I am. I know what's true. I know how life works. I know what happens after death. I know my purpose. These certainties feel like ultimate safety, but Jung observed they are, in fact, self-imposed prisons. As spiritual depth truly develops, these certainties start to irrevocably crack, not because they are proven empirically wrong, but because you realize the very need for certainty was keeping you confined, preventing you from seeing a larger truth. Truth isn't something you can hold. It's something that flows. The moment you grip it, it fossilizes into dogma. One of Jung's most brilliant patients was a physicist who came to him in profound crisis. His spiritual awakening had completely shattered his rigid scientific certainties. He said, "I used to know how the universe worked. Now I realize I don't even know how my coffee cup works. The more conscious I become, the less certain I am about anything." This wasn't confusion. It was radical clarity. He was seeing past the illusion of knowledge into the vast, humbling reality of mystery. But the transition was agonizing. His mind desperately wanted to rebuild certainty, to find new spiritual facts to replace the old scientific ones. But every time he tried to crystallize a spiritual truth, it would instantly dissolve. Jung watched him slowly quit the need for solid, known ground. First, he quit needing to know how things worked. Then he quit needing to know why things happen. Finally, he quit needing to know who he really was. He entered what Jung recognized as the cloud of unknowing, a state where not knowing becomes more truthful than any knowing could ever be. This quitting of certainty happens in distinct stages. First, you quit certainty about the external world. Then you quit certainty about others' motivations. Then you quit certainty about your own past. Finally, you quit certainty about your own fundamental identity. Each stage of release brings both terror and immense liberation. The ego experiences it as a kind of death, which it is, the death of the know-it-all mind that kept you safe but small. A woman described her process. "I used to have strong opinions about everything: politics, spirituality, relationships, purpose. Now when someone asks what I believe, I honestly don't know. Not from confusion, but from profound openness. Every certainty I release creates space for something more beautiful than answers, presence with what is." Jung found that people who successfully quit certainty develop something truly remarkable: the ability to hold paradox. They can believe contradictory things simultaneously without needing resolution. They can act decisively without being absolutely certain. They can commit fully while staying open to being completely wrong. This isn't wishy-washy relativism. It is what Jung witnessed as spiritual maturity, the recognition that reality is infinitely bigger than any mental model can contain. You quit certainty not because nothing is true, but because truth is too alive and dynamic to be caged in concepts. The fifth thing highly spiritual people slowly quit is one of the hardest: blame. Not just blaming others, but the entire victim-perpetrator narrative that the ego uses to make coherent sense of suffering. Jung observed that as people develop spiritually, they undergo a radical internal shift in how they relate to their wounds. They stop seeing themselves primarily as victims of others' actions and start seeing themselves as participants in a much larger collective pattern. This isn't about excusing harm or bypassing trauma. It is about powerfully reclaiming internal power. The quitting of blame is slow and often agonizing because blame serves so many critical psychological functions. It explains our pain. It preserves our cherished innocence. It gives us a compelling identity. It bonds us with others who have been similarly wronged. Letting go of blame can feel like letting go of our entire sacred story. A woman came to Jung filled with legitimate grievances: an abusive childhood, a betraying ex-husband, discriminating employers. Her anger was justified. Her blame was factually accurate, but it was also slowly killing her. She was so completely identified with being wrong that she couldn't move forward or Breathe freely. Through years of deep work, Jung watched her slowly quit blame, not by denying what happened or forgiving prematurely, but by recognizing her own subtle participation in destructive patterns. She saw how she unconsciously chose partners who would predictably betray her, jobs that would discriminate, and situations that would confirm her underlying victim identity. She told Jung, "The day I stopped blaming was the day I became free. Not because others weren't wrong, they were, but because I finally saw that holding on to blame was my choice. I was using their wrongness to avoid my own responsibility for my life." This shift is excruciating for the ego. It means taking responsibility for the experience of things that genuinely weren't your fault. It means seeing how you unconsciously contributed to or stayed in your own wounding. It means admitting that on some level, you needed the very experiences you've spent years blaming others for, because they were the catalyst for your strength. Jung documented the stages of quitting blame. 1. Rage at the unfairness. This shouldn't have happened. 2. Recognition of patterns. This keeps happening. 3. Seeing unconscious participation. I somehow contribute to this. 4. Taking radical responsibility. I am the author of my experience. 5. Transcending the victim-perpetrator paradigm. We are all playing roles in each other's awakening. A man who'd spent decades blaming his father for his struggles went through this process. He said, "I realized I'd made my father into a monster to avoid seeing my own shadows. The day I quit blaming him, I saw him clearly for the first time. Just another wounded human doing his best with his own trauma. And I saw myself clearly too. Not a victim, but a soul who chose this exact challenge for my own evolution." This doesn't mean accepting abuse or staying in harmful situations. It means recognizing that even our deepest wounds serve our awakening. Jung observed that the people who successfully quit blame don't become doormats. They become powerful. They stop giving others the power to define or control their story. The 6th thing spiritual people quit is particularly subtle and pervasive: spiritual bypassing. This is the use of spiritual concepts to avoid genuine human experience, spiritual practices to escape difficult emotions, or enlightenment as a strategy to bypass the messy work of being fully human. Jung saw this constantly in spiritual and New Age communities. People using meditation to avoid feeling anger. Using "everything happens for a reason" to avoid debilitating grief. Using "we're all one" to avoid setting necessary boundaries. Using ego death to avoid the painful psychological work of building a healthy, mature self. The spiritual path in these instances become just another elaborate defense mechanism against life. As genuine spiritual maturity develops, this bypassing becomes fundamentally impossible. Your soul demands full embodiment, spiritual and human, transcendent and immanent, infinite and intimate. You can no longer successfully use heaven to escape the messy reality of earth. A dedicated Buddhist practitioner came to Jung after 20 years of intense meditation. He'd achieved remarkable states of consciousness, experienced profound emptiness, and touched the void. But his relationships were disasters. His emotions were catastrophically numbed. His life was profoundly dissociated. He'd used enlightenment to bypass his deep, messy humanity. Jung watched him slowly quit this bypass. It was more painful than his original awakening. He had to consciously come back down into his body, into his feelings, into his very human needs and desires. After touching the infinite, he had to learn to be finite again. After experiencing no self, he had to rebuild a healthy, functional self. He described it: "I thought spirituality was about transcending human experience. Now I realize it's about finally having human experience. I spent 20 years trying to be nobody. Now I'm learning to be somebody, this particular somebody with this particular life, these particular wounds and gifts. The quitting of spiritual bypassing looks like admitting you have preferences despite accepting what is. It looks like feeling anger despite understanding everyone is doing their best. It looks like wanting intimacy despite knowing we are already one. It looks like having boundaries despite seeing all as self. It looks like experiencing fear despite trusting the universe. This creates what Jung observed as spiritual maturity, the ability to be fully human and fully spiritual simultaneously, not using one to escape the other, but living powerfully at the intersection where heaven meets earth. The final thing highly spiritual people quit might be the most quietly pervasive: the isolation of awakening. This is the belief that spiritual growth necessarily means growing apart from others, that consciousness creates loneliness, and that awakening means being alone on a high peak. Jung observed that while spiritual growth often requires periods of deep solitude, genuine spiritual maturity inevitably leads back to connection, but connection of a completely different quality. Not the unconscious merging of the asleep, but the conscious, boundary-aware meeting of the awake. Early in awakening, isolation feels necessary and even noble. You're seeing through illusions others still believe. You're feeling things others can't feel. You're knowing things others don't know. How can you possibly connect with people who are asleep? But Jung watched this subtle spiritual superiority slowly dissolve in those who continued growing. They quit the subtle arrogance of being more conscious. They quit the identity of being the awakened one among the sleeping. They quit the isolation that was often actually protecting them from the risk of true intimacy. A woman who'd spent years in spiritual solitude told Jung, "I thought I was alone because I was too conscious for others. Then I realized I was alone because I was afraid. Afraid of being seen in my vulnerability, my struggles, my very human, non-enlightened moments." My spiritual isolation was actually spiritual pride. As she quit this isolation, something beautiful happened. She found she could connect with anyone, not by lowering her consciousness, but by embracing her full humanity. She could be with unconscious people without judgment because she recognized her own lingering unconscious patterns. She could love asleep people because she remembered her own long period of sleep. Jung documented that genuine spiritual maturity leads to what he called conscious relationship, the ability to connect without merging, to love without attachment, to be intimate without losing the self, to share truth without preaching, and to be truly together in aloneness. The quitting of isolation doesn't mean returning to unconscious social patterns. It means finding those rare others who are also quietly quitting. Quitting approval seeking, quitting specialness, quitting performance, quitting certainty, quitting blame, quitting bypassing. And with these people, creating something new, conscious community. As we reach the end of this journey through what highly spiritual people quit, Jung would want you to understand something crucial. This quitting isn't loss, it is liberation. Each thing you release creates immediate, tangible space for something more authentic to emerge. When you quit seeking approval, inner worth emerges. When you quit being special, true uniqueness emerges. When you quit performing happiness, genuine joy emerges. When you quit needing certainty, wisdom emerges. When you quit blame, power emerges. When you quit bypassing, embodiment emerges. When you quit isolation, real connection emerges. The process is slow because it's not just behavioral change. It is identity death and rebirth. You're not just quitting habits. You're quitting who you thought you were. And that takes time, courage, and enormous compassion for yourself. Jung observed that this process typically takes years, even decades. You'll quit and return, release and grip again, let go and grab back. This isn't failure, it's the spiral nature of growth. Each time you return to an old pattern, you're a little less attached. Each time you grip again, your grip is a little looser. If you're in this process of slowly quitting, Jung would want you to know you are not losing yourself. You are powerfully finding yourself. Every release is a revelation, Every letting go is a coming home. The things you're quitting needed to be experienced fully before they could be released. You needed to seek approval to know the emptiness of external validation. You needed to be special to discover the freedom of being ordinary. You needed certainty to appreciate mystery. You needed to blame to find your own power. This isn't a process you can rush or force. The quitting happens in its own time, in its own way. Your job isn't to quit faster, but to be present with the quitting, to notice what's falling away, to grieve what's dying, to celebrate what's being born. And remember, you're not alone in this. All over the world, souls are waking up and slowly quitting the exact same things. We're all discovering that spiritual growth isn't about adding more. It's about releasing what was never true. Not about becoming someone new, but about quitting being someone we're not. If this journey resonates with you, if you're recognizing your own slow quitting in these patterns, subscribe to this channel and become part of our growing community of awakening souls. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss our daily deep dives into the spiritual journey.